And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask at all. Right, today we are going to be looking at actually session 4 of the presentation of financial statements, which is basically a continuation from the last session that we had. So for session 4, we've done fixed assets, a little bit more financial statements on the partnerships, and then we're going to look today at SFP. Don't forget that on Wednesday, we'll be looking a bit more at budgeting, and then we'll have our last session sometime in October. So it's lots to look forward to at the moment. Right, so before we begin, I would just like to remind you that we have an errata. So there's a little mistake that we just came through. So on your additional information, for they have the fixed deposit with QR Bank, which consists of two deposits. Please rectify the 31st of July, make sure that it is 2025 and not 2023. Right, and then as well on your answer sheet, you have your answer sheet hopefully in front of you, and it basically looks blank. I just would like you to add the following figures. Please insert onto your statement of financial position, your answer sheet, the following figures: the 825,000 Rand for current assets, the trade and other receivables amount for 218,150, as well as the partner's equity of 3,500,000 Rand. Right, so with that said, let's get into the activity. Activity 4, the information was extracted from the books of JZ Traders on the 28th of February 2023. So when you see information like that, just a reminder to myself and you that we are working with the financial year running from the 1st of March 2022 up until the 28th of February 2023, which means we only want to record everything that's happened from the 1st of March up until the 28th of February every year. They also tell us in the information the required. So this is very important because this is what the question expects of you to be able to answer. So for grade 11, 4.1.1, prepare the statement of financial position on the 28th of February. Bear in mind, some figures which I have shown you have been inserted in the answer book. So very important, the statement of financial position. Sometimes, I'm sure our educators, we like to use the balance sheet because it's more formally known now as the statement of financial position. We like to just, it's changed from the balance sheet. And then we also are asked to do the trade and other payables note, which is basically what goes into the statement of financial position, or rather one of those notes. What I would like us to have a look at is the fact that for our statement of financial position, a lot of learners become a bit, I want to say scared. However, what they're basically asking us is to do for the statement of financial position, again, formerly known as the balance sheet, what are the total assets, the equity, and the liabilities of the business? This can be illustrated as follows. So for our total assets, it's always going to be broken up into our non-current and current assets, fixed assets, financial assets, inventory, trade and other receivables, and cash equivalent. Also, reminder that you have to basically become more familiar with the layout. If you don't know it yet, please make sure that you make an effort to know it a bit better. Because again, it's also something from grade 10 that we've done in the last year. We'll be doing it this year and as well in grade 12. So again, as you can see, there's basically nothing has changed. So it's exactly the same as last year and what we'll be doing this year and again for next year. The same goes for the liabilities. For liabilities, again, also broken up into non-current liabilities as well as current liabilities. Again, a loan which we have for more than 1 year, and current liabilities, anything that we have to pay within the next year. And again, same thing hasn't changed since last year. I'm sure you can agree. So I'm sure you're okay with this format. The last thing that I would like to introduce to you, I guess I'm sure you know this as well, is the equity part. So for grade 11, we have partners equity, which includes capital and current account. And again, this is more for grade 11 partnerships. So if anything has changed, if anything looks different, it would be equity side. And what's nice is, or what we can look forward to, is the fact that equity will change in grade 12 as well. Right? So a few things that will be included in assets and liabilities. However, it will remain exactly the same. Right. What learners tend to do often as well is they get a bit confused with non-current assets or current assets and current liabilities. However, we still know these items. Why? Because it's still our land and buildings, equipment and vehicles, basically under a new name. We have inventory is always going to be our trading stock and consumable stores on hand. Trade and other receivables is always going to be our net debtors, our accrued income, prepaid expense. Cash and cash equivalents always be our bank, petty cash, savings account, any fixed deposit that will mature within the next year, or even look at the loan, again, just long-term loans, and trade and other payables. If there's any creditors amount that we owe, if there's a bank overdraft amount that we perhaps owe the bank, any income received in advance, and any accrued expense will be our trade and other payables. So I hope that everyone is familiar with the format. The reason why we are so fixated on this line, the one on the screen at the moment, is because this is something universal. For example, if you were to work in Australia, you will be able to use the same format, that we use here in South Africa as well. Right? So everyone around the world should know the format. Okay. So for the list of balances, for activity 4, we have the current account, fixed deposits, bank overdraft, and accrued expenses, etc. What I like to do is I'm going to highlight certain colors in certain for different concepts. For example, our assets will be a different color, our equity will be a different color, as well as the liabilities. For the equity, that we have the current account of Jade and the current account of Zenith. Those two accounts belong to the equity accounts. So that should be familiar. That is the newest thing that we've been introduced to in grade 11. Something that I'm sure you are well aware of is everything in blue is my assets, and everything in green will be my liabilities. So I hope you can maybe highlight that, and that's the thing. I think with highlighting, it makes it look a bit, more colorful and more exciting. And obviously accounting is an exciting subject. I'm sure you agree. So we have the following information. I just want you to be able to split it up, looking at the list of balances. Like I said, the current account, that's partner's equity. The fixed, and then with that information, the partner's equity amount amounts to 800,000 and 900,000. So what I'm going to do is take this list of balances and actually insert it to my answer sheet. So I'm just going to use my page, what you have in front of you at the moment. So what you have in front of you right now on the screen is this page, this document over here, where again we are doing activity 4. What I would like you to do is these list of balances, make sure that you know where they are supposed to be inserted. So for example, these balances will be inserted in our answer sheet over here. So you can basically add certain amounts in brackets already, which will make it so much easier for you. All right, so just to give you an indication, so we have 800 plus 900,000, which will be in our equity and liability section. For current account, the 800 plus the 900. For our fixed deposit, we have an amount of 380,000 Rand, which again can be inserted. We have our assets, the savings account and petty cash, which is a current asset, which will be included in cash and cash equivalent. So again, there we have the fixed deposit, the financial asset is 380,000, as well as the cash and cash equivalent. Always make sure you start off with the amounts that are given to you in the trial balance, because those figures are not necessarily the final figures. They might have to be adjusted. So remember, these are easy marks that you can get, not doing anything difficult, just by inserting it under the relevant banner. And then we have our current liabilities in green, And we have, so we're different for bank overdraft, that's also current liability, which will be on the face of your statement of financial position. Then we have the last four, we have accrued expenses, a current liability, which will be under trade and other payables note. Remember, we were asked to do the note, so there's a heads up, as well as deferred income, as well as creditors control. However, you'll see that creditors control is a question mark, meaning it might be a figure that we have to figure out later on, or in other words, it's a balancing figure. So those amounts, we have the last one, the loan, which is a non-current liability, which will be disclosed under the loans. So for our equity and liability, so far we have a bank overdraft of 25,000 Rand, which we've just inserted into your answer sheet. And then we have our accrued expenses and income received in advance in our trade and other payables note of 7,100 and 5,800 Rand. Remember, these amounts were given, so it should be fairly simple to do. Now we have basically the following structure for our answer sheet in your statement of financial position. You have the following figures given to you, as well as amounts that were just added from the balances. And I think that a lot of learners sometimes look past, getting the easy marks, and maybe they tend to just go for the difficult things, but don't forget these easy marks, because it makes it so much easier to pass at the end of the day. Right, on our next, and then on the trade and other payables, we also have these two amounts which were already given just from looking at the list of balances. Right, so let's look at the additional information. The first additional information that's been given is the fixed deposit with QR Bank consists of two deposits. It's 120,000, which matures on the 31st of July 2025, and a 260,000 Rand, which matures on the 31st of July 2023. And I'm sure you've seen that this 120 plus the 260 actually gives us our 380,000 Rand amount, which was given us in the balances. However, because of the dates, this actually affects our financial information a lot, in the sense that we have the following. The first one, because it matures in the future, right? So not now, very much in the future. That is a financial asset, which is a fixed deposit, which will be there for more than 12 months, which will stay a financial asset. However, the next one, it's also a financial asset, also fixed deposit. However, it matures within the next 12 months. Now, I know what you're thinking. It looks exactly the same, and it's true, it does. However, because, remember, a fixed deposit, so just remember that a fixed deposit is something that it's money that we're going to invest. And we want to be able to know how much are we going to invest this money for a long period of time, and how much money are we going to get back in a shorter period of time. So because of that, we have the following. In our financial statements, we have a financial asset amount of 380,000 Rand, which was given. However, because of the 120,000 is actually the only amount that should be there, and then we have the 260, which only matures on the 31st of July 2023 within 12 months. What we are going to do now, we are just going to basically minus the 260,000 Rand, because it's not a non-current asset, and rather transfer it to a current asset. Right? It's basically as if money is moving from one account to the other. And what we are left with, we'll have the 120,000 Rand. We'll be left with 120,000 Rand over here in our final total, and we have an extra cash and cash equivalent figure of 260, which will be added to the amounts that we already have. For the second adjustment, we have the loan statement that was received from AB Bank on the 28th of February 2023, showing the following information. Now, I'm sure you've been doing this at school or have done it as well. Just to repeat, what this means is the 1.6 million, that's how much money we've been owing at the beginning of the year, right? And then we have an interest on a loan, which is obviously an interest expense. And this interest means that we are going to basically capitalize it. And by capitalizing interest, that basically just means we are going to add the interest amount to what we owe, right? So whatever we owe, we're going to add the interest, meaning that the interest is going to make the loan amount actually much higher. We also have a repayment, which includes the interest amount. So we are going to try and pay back the loan amount. And we are repaying about 225,000 Rand. And I'm sure you understand that a repayment means that we are going to minus the 225,000 Rand. So if you're working downwards, so it's plus the 90 minus the 225, that will actually give us our closing figure at the end of the year. Right. What they say in the next part of information, they say in terms of the loan agreement, there's a fixed capital portion of the loan that is going to be repaid annually. Now, there are many ways to calculate this portion. One of them being, we can now look at the 90,000, the difference between the 90,000 and the 225,000 Rand, because that is the amount that is going to be repaid annually every year for the loan. And if you do that sum, you'll get to 135,000 Rand. So the difference, in other words, the amount that we are actually repaying on the loan happens to be 135,000 Rand. This 135,000 Rand, because it's something that we repay every year, we can now also rephrase it as what we could normally known as a short-term portion of loan, or other words, a current portion of loan. Again, taking something which is long-term, but then reclassifying it as something which is going to be short-term. And that short-term portion of loan will be in our current liabilities. All right. Then the next slide, we have the loan statement received. They say regarding the loan, how will this be input into our answer sheet? So I would like you to go ahead and go into your answer sheet. Under non-current liabilities, you have your loan from AB Bank, and the amount will be the 1,680,000 plus the 90 minus the 225 and then minus the 135,000 Rand, which will give us 1,410,000 Rand. And like I just said, a portion of this loan is now going to be this portion over here. The 135 is a short-term portion. So this is not changing the balance of the loan, however, just reclassifying it from a non-current liability to a current liability. And you're left with the following. So your current short-term portion of loan, and here's a tip. Whatever the short-term portion of the loan is, make sure that whenever you minus it from your loan amount under non-current, you transfer it to the current liability, right? Because you get a mark. So let's say, for argument's sake, that you are not sure about calculating this figure. Maybe you had to calculate it and you couldn't do it properly. Whatever amount you decided to use or amount that you got to get to the current portion of loan, remember to take that answer and transfer it to the face of our statement of financial position under current portion of loan, because you'll get a mark for transferring that amount correctly. Alright, so your answer sheets look like this. Then we have another piece of additional information. They say that a new employee joined the business halfway through February. The bookkeeper only processed the expense part of the transaction. So which means that if I'm going to do an expense, so debit the expense and we have to credit certain things, right? So in other words, they said credit bank. So let's look at what they were supposed to include. In our trade and other payables note, we have the following line items, right? We have creditors for salaries, SARS, pay as you earn, and UIF. This is the information basically that we have learned in grade 10. And now you can see the importance of, or rather, we did a chapter of this in grade 10 and how they basically pull certain information from last year into this year's paper. And that is, again, prior knowledge that you are supposed to have remembered or supposed to know. So what we're going to do now is to calculate the amount for creditors for salaries, which is another way of just saying what is the net salary that we are going to give our worker. The net salary after deductions, the gross minus deductions, is our net salary, and they are supposed to be paid 18,300 Rand. So again, it wasn't processed properly. We are just processing this payment properly. Okay, then that's our 18,300, which is given. And then we have our pay as you earn, which we had to calculate, which is going to be 18% of our net salary, 3294. And then we have, last but not least, we also have our UIF. So for the UIF, we'll calculate it as 18,300 multiplied by 1%, which gives us 183,000 Rand, 183 Rand, pardon me. However, what you need to remember is that we have two types of UIF, and that what actually should have been included in here is the fact that this UIF is actually a deduction. So we have a split between deduction and contribution. The deduction is what will be deducted from the person's salary or wage, and then we have the contribution, what the business is willing to contribute towards their UIF. So both amounts, 183 times 2, will go into the UIF account. Right, then we have additional information for current ratio on the 28th of February. 2023 is 2,5 to 1. And what does that mean exactly? If you're looking at your current assets and comparing it to your current liabilities, we have inventory plus your trade and other receivables plus any cash and cash equivalent that will be compared to our current liabilities. So what they're trying to show us now is that we have the answer given, it's 2,5 to 1. And what does that mean? It means that our current assets is 2,5 times greater than every one current liability. And that information can be illustrated as follows. Reminder that we do not have the current liability amount. However, there's a way to work backwards. So what I'm going to do now is basically try and work with you on the answer sheet, from here. So, right. So basically, hopefully your answer sheet looks like mine so far. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to fill in certain information that's not given, and it's very simple. We have to just remember the format. So firstly, for your assets, again, reminder, my assets are all in blue. The assets are broken into non-current. Assets are broken up into non-current and current assets, right? So these two answers, this answer over here plus this 825, will give me my total assets. Okay. So what we're doing now is they've just said that the current ratio is 2,5 to 1, which means that my current assets, 825, represents, or rather is 2,5 times greater than my current liabilities amount over here. And again, this amount is not given, so we have to basically be able to calculate it. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say, well, how do I get to it? There's a calculation which we do, which is basically say multiplied by what you want divided by what you have. We say 825,000, right, multiplied by I want one portion, I have 2,5, right? Or in other words, you can just divide it by 2,5 to get your answer. And the answer that we will get there is an amount of 330,000 Rand once you work that out. What happens now is we have the certain information given, but some things are still a bit blank. Right, so what we have to do is remember that so what we have to look at now is what can we include in the figures to basically complete the statement. Because remember, in an exam, you want to make sure that you complete as many items as you can, and if you cannot, make sure that you obviously put in your final figure to get a final mark. Also, reminder to make sure that you always show your calculations of how you got to an amount, and that could also be helpful as well in terms of getting extra marks. So with regards to our partner's equity, right, it is broken into capital and current account. So these two amounts over here gives us 3.5 million rand. So how do I get to that? I will basically say, so obviously there's only one figure that's unknown. 3.5 million less something gave me 1.7 million, right? So you could basically just minus the two amounts from each other and you will get to a missing figure of 1.8 million. Okay. Next up we have for our loan amount, right? This loan amount give a balance we've just calculated and we've inserted. And because there's no other non-current liability, that figure remains the same. And look how important it is that this figure actually, you transfer it to the top, because this is the total non-current liabilities. This is the total non-current liabilities, which needs to be basically placed here on top. Right, that shows that you're done with the figure. The last part we have over here, and as you can see here, we have non-current liabilities figure. We are given 1.4 million, and then we have the current liability figure of 330,000. And again, that's part of all our liabilities amount. And then if we look at the equity part, is actually given to us. We don't have to calculate anything. And again, there's our equity. So far we have these balances are given. So you have your 3.5 million plus the 1,410,000 rand, and then add in your 330,000 rand, and that should give us our total equity and liabilities. Once you do that, you will find that the answer, the total, is 5,240,000 rand. I hope you got that as well. Remember that we still aren't actually done with certain informations. For example, we have trade and other payables, right? So look how quickly I jump into getting my answers done. So we have also another unknown figure, our trade and other payables, or formerly known as our creditors, in accrued expenses, and all of that. Yes, we are given information here. However, there is, so if you look at my trade and other payables note, we have all this information given. However, there is still one more figure not given, right? So our trade and our creditors control figure is not given. However, it's not a chain smash because we can actually calculate it. So remember that this trade and other payables note, right? This figure, this answer over here is this amount over here. Okay. This amount is basically coming from there. So how do I calculate it? We basically just have to say, if you look at this again, all our current liabilities, which is given, all the current liabilities added up gives amounts to 330,000 rand. So obviously it's a balancing figure, 330,000 rand minus the 135,000 rand minus the 25,000, and we have a remaining figure of 170,000 rand. That gives us our total trade and other payables balance. Okay, so this trade and other payables total, we can then transfer it to our trade and other payables note over here, which will give me again my total. Okay, I'm sure you can see it as well. So we are given the total figure, but we don't have the initial amount, right? However, everything added up over here will amount to this figure over here. Okay, and how do I calculate it? Again, another balancing figure where you basically, so if you're working downwards, we would have added everything. So instead of adding everything, we're working upwards. Let's just minus. So from 170,000 minus the 366 minus the 3294, minus the 18,300, minus the 5,800, and minus my 7,100 Rand. We will get to an amount of 131,480. Okay, I hope you agree with that. If you have any questions, reminder to go onto the on Facebook and send a comment, or even on the WhatsApp line. So what we are doing here, and again, how important this is that you have to remember not to focus too much on making sure that the amounts are perfect. As a matter of fact, we really have to focus on also making sure that we write in certain amounts and are able to actually get marks for the amounts. So with the way that we will get our marks is to make sure that we always show our calculations. I think sometimes as a learner, in the exam, we always feel like there's not enough time for the exam in accounting. But also I think it comes to, we don't practice under time pressure, under time management. And what happens is, when we do a question, you're so fixated on trying to make it perfect that you forget that there are other easy marks that you can actually score somewhere else just by inserting your amounts. So again, whenever you are in a question and you find something difficult, reminder please to always make sure that you can do what you can. And if something is too difficult, if something is too tricky and really can't do it, just move on and do the next thing. Right? And when hopefully you have enough time when you're done, and you can circle back to it and sit with it a lot bit longer. So what we have so far, we have our trade and other payables note, which is complete. And a reminder again, always make sure you show your amounts or any type of calculations, because these are always method marks that we can earn later on. Then we have our total equity section. It's all completed obviously over here. The nice thing about this, or the very satisfying moment, is as follows. Reminder that your total equity and liabilities are always equal to our total assets. So this total equity balance over here, it's always going to be equal to my total assets. And again, you've been taught this in grade 8 and 9. Assets equal to owner's equity, and this is actually the purpose thereof, to get to this point in your financial accounting career. So we have here, this 5240 will automatically be the same figure as this. And again, do not fixate on, I don't think my answer is right. Make sure that you always transfer that total that you got and transfer it to your answer sheet. Okay. And again, that is easy marks that you can get just by taking your wrong answer. Imagine if it's wrong, you made a mistake. As long as you carried on with it, you know the principle, you carry on with it, and you will still get your marks really easily. Then we have the following things left. Right, we have the following things also left. We have our total assets, which is 5,240,000. However, I have my current assets, and again, my total assets is a mixture of my non-current assets, and I'm just adding my current assets to get to this amount. However, now we see now that the current assets amount was given. However, the non-current assets amount is not given. Again, that's not difficult, because it's like a math sum basically. Because we have the 825,000 and we have the total assets, we can basically get to the non-current asset amount, which will now be 5,240,000 Rand. And we can now minus what was given, which was the 825,000 Rand. Right, so you just have to minus those two amounts from each other, because again, this amount plus this amount will equal to my total assets. Again, my non-current plus my current assets will equal to my total assets amount. And now you're left with this figure over here, which I can calculate really easily, which is 4,415,000 Rand. Right, I hope that makes sense, and I hope that was easy enough. Right. What we also have now is the following. We have, lastly, we're coming to the end of the question actually. One thing I also want to make note of, I was actually talking to one of my learners today and I asked, do you enjoy the balance sheet, the statement of financial position? And she said, no, she doesn't like it. But she likes it because she earns marks, method marks as well. So just a shout out to my school as well. So again, this just goes to show you doesn't have to be perfect, but one of the things that you have to make sure that you can do for grade 11 is that you've already learned about the income statement, and you are learning, and you have learned as well about the statement of financial position, as well as the notes that come with it. It's not very important to basically know know all the notes, but then again, it's important to know what is included in the notes. And as you can see from the question that we are doing now, they asked for the statement of financial position with one specific note, trade and other payables. And that's what they can do in the exams. They could ask for an extract of the assets or the equity and liabilities and a note to the current assets note or things like that. So again, make sure that you always show your calculations and amounts that are used. Make sure that you always have it on your answer sheet to make it easier for the marker, and make sure that you always can earn marks to make sure that you pass well. Then again, also for this statement of financial position, what we find is that a lot of learners, again, because they're not comfortable with the format, or sometimes they're not sure what should be included, make sure that you actually now in grade 11 that you actually know the format. If you haven't learned it last year or you're still struggling with it this year, make sure that you call the teacher or ask what do you need to do to basically revise. What you can do is short little tests, short little tests that you can do maybe with your friend as well, just to make sure that you know the layout a bit better. Once you know the layout a bit better, it means that you can spend more time on the question. And I'm sure you guys have noticed that in the past, in grade 10 it was, okay, they give you information, you just have to insert it. However, what they like to incorporate is more mathematical problem solving skills. And again, that comes with more practice. So the only way we'll get better at it is if we practice. And really, I promise you, it will get easier. And it's nice, I think, because it's so challenging, but when you get it right, it's like this most relieving feeling ever. So it's a very proud moment for us all. Right, so the last part we're going to look at quickly, a few things we're going to finish up on our question. We have, for our fixed assets over here, right, remember that the total non-current assets, there's a little box actually over here, our total non-current assets adds up to 4,415,000 Rand. The financial asset, we calculated it amounted to 120,000 Rand with the information given. And obviously the difference here, this balancing figure over here, another unknown, it's basically very simple. We just have to take the 4,415,000 and minus the 120,000 Rand. So I'm just going to write out the sum. What you had to do was take the 4,415,000 Rand and minus your 120,000 Rand, and that will give us the final figure of 4,295,000. Okay, so now we have everything inserted over here as well. That's complete. And now the last one that we have here that's not given is our inventory amount. Now, before I actually go to that, I would just like to go back to the slides, and there was certain information, just in case, for example, different information can be given for different reasons. So we have, in this session, we had the current assets, which was given, right? And then basically, how did we have to calculate the current liabilities? You had to take the 825,000 divided into the 2,5, which will give us 330,000 Rand. Now in this case, again, the trade and other receivables amount is actually given. However, I would like to show you something where if it was not given, how could we calculate it? Okay, so just a reminder that we have over here. So When we talk about current ratio, we are looking at current assets and then comparing it to the current liabilities. And then we have, and again, what I think sometimes learners forget is it's not just current assets, but rather what goes into current assets. And just a reminder that our current assets is made up of our inventory, which is what? Trading stock, and consumable stores on hand. And what is consumable stores on hand? It's basically any stationery that's remaining and any packing material that we have left on hand in the business, plus our trade and other receivables, which is our debtors, our accrued income, prepaid expenses, and plus any cash and anything equivalent to cash, such as cash float, petty cash, savings account, and so on. And compare that to current liabilities. So again, we said that's 2.5 times greater than the liabilities. And what's the next piece of information was given under additional information, which was the asset test ratio on the 28th of February. The asset test ratio is 1.5 to 1. And what does that mean? Again, it's basically looking at our current assets minus the inventory. Will compare that to your current liabilities. And what does that mean? Again, that can be written out completely different. It can be your trade and other receivables plus your cash and cash equivalent, and compare that to your current liabilities. Like similar to the one before us, again, trade and other receivables, which is debtors, accrued income, and any prepaid expenses, and anything equivalent to cash. It's now, they say it's 1.5 times greater than the current liability. So I just want to show you a little picture. Let's really draw that on this sheet. So what does this mean? They are saying that current assets, compare that to your current liabilities, it's 2.5 to 1. And then they say your current assets, right, minus your inventory, compare that to your current liabilities, it's 1.5 to 1. Okay, so I'm sure you can agree with me when I say that the difference between this figure over here, 2.5 and 1.5, is 1 to 1, right? And what's missing here? The inventory is missing, and we're comparing that to the current liabilities. Just a side note, and this is a bit more mathematical type of tricky things that you can come through also in questions, is that basically they're saying that the inventory amount is 1 to 1 with the current liabilities. Our inventory is basically the same as our current liabilities as well. So just a note of that. And then if you also look, again, just a reminder, our current assets, right, you know the layout as well. Again, it is our debtors, it's our debtors, our accrued income, and prepaid expense. And again, in grade 11, we know now as net debtors, because it's your debtors control minus any provision for bad debt. And again, that is just being compared to the current liabilities, right? Our creditors, compare that to your creditors, compare that to your accrued expenses, right? And compare, this is prepaid expense, sorry. And compare that again, these are all being compared to the income received in advance, right? So again, don't be afraid when you see current assets and current liabilities. You do know more than you think, because these are all things that we have been doing for the past few years in accounting, as well as EMS as well. All right, so the last part, let's quickly have a look at our answer sheet. So in our answer sheet, we have the last section, like I just said, that what we can do now is, again, we can also look at our current assets, again, is made up of inventory, trade, and other receivables. All of these three things are added up and given to this, added up over here. So as you can see here, 825, and the only one that's missing over here is my inventory amount, which wasn't given. And again, very easy. We can just take 825 minus the 218150 and minus the 276850. And you'll see that the amount that's missing is also 330,000, which, coming back to, if this amount wasn't given in the question, there are other ways to calculate certain unknowns, basically. Okay, so that is the format, and I hope that you can see your format as well. So let's quickly have a look at the final one. So basically all these amounts I'm sure you have as well. You just add these figures again if you don't have it. Just want to see the final figures in your answer sheet. So all of these things, all of these amounts have been calculated, which we've done together. The last part is our equity and liabilities. Again, if you have any questions, you can always comment on the Facebook, or send a WhatsApp. And I hope that everything is basically very clear and it makes sense, right? Like I tried to do was incorporate blue for assets and green for liabilities. So I hope this all makes sense, because all this information basically comes together. And then we have also our trade and other payables note, which was also given, right? So again, ladies and gentlemen, grade 11 learners, I hope this makes sense. And if there's anything that you do not understand, please let us know in the WhatsApp group. A reminder again to please make sure that you always try to make sure that you actually try and memorize the format for the statement of financial position as well as the income statement, because that will help us actually save time as well. And yeah, if there's any questions, please let us know, and you're always welcome to pop a WhatsApp and let us know. Yes, and I think that's all for today. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.